Hi, everyone, and welcome to The Hash, your daily beat on crypto and culture. My name is Naomi Brockwell, and today on the show, we have Jen Sanasie, Zack Seward, and Ben Powers. Welcome to the show, guys. We're going to kick it off by talking about A16Z. So, Zack, I'm going to throw it over to you. What's going on there?
A16Z and so much more. We're going to talk about DeFi governance, which is a really important topic as DeFi becomes a much more prominent part of the crypto ecosystem. DeFi, right? It's governed by token holders who can dictate the future of various protocols. There was a couple of controversial governance moves in the last couple of weeks, especially in Uniswap land. And A16Z, big holder of Uni, can exert quite a deal of power in making some of these decisions about what happens on Uniswap and other platforms. So they are wanting to open source a big part of this process and kickstart a conversation around VC governance in the world of DeFi. I'm going to kick this to you, Naomi. I mean, I think this is really interesting. A16Z obviously is a major investor in a number of protocols that have token-powered governance mechanisms. What's your take on VC's role in the world of DeFi to date, and where do you think it can improve?
Yeah, I mean, it's an interesting field, right? Because sometimes the incentives are not necessarily aligned with the projects, and like you kind of saw that with OpenBazaar when you had VC money funding that, and OpenBazaar was kind of like this decentralized marketplace essentially, but because of the VC money, which makes it more centralized to the investors, they had to rule out all of the markets that would have been interested in a decentralized marketplace for compliance reasons. So it does add some friction there, especially as we have DeFi projects trying to find their way in a very heavily regulated world, and in a world where governing bodies like SEC want to increasingly exert control over these areas. And it makes it easier for them to do that if there are certain centralized entities that hold more power than others. I think it's really cool what A16Z is doing, because they're kind of recognizing that, and perhaps that they may be a focal point for some of these DeFi projects, especially when we have the rhetoric from Gensler where he's like, oh, DeFi is a security, you can't get away from me. And really, he's incorrect. If something is decentralized in the world of finance, the government can't go after it. There's no focal point for them to attack. But if there are like major stakeholders, or there are centralized like coding bodies, or all of that it does make it easier for the government to make a case. I think they're wrong, but it does make it easier for them to make a case. And so by A16Z kind of going this more decentralized route, saying we'll open source this, you can see exactly how we make decisions, this is all very transparent. I think it really does help the decentralized ecosystem. But Zack, I'll throw it back to you.
Yeah, I mean, I think governance is a big turn-off word to a lot of people, but I think this is a really, really, really important discussion that needs to happen a lot more. And I think, like, you read pieces like this, you read pieces that we've published in the past on various Uniswap governance proposals, and you kind of get the feel that you're seeing sort of this, these like, sort of like the crypto, like founding fathers, like we're hearkening back to this era of how do we figure out governance in a way that is truly democratized and decentralized, and not just controlled exclusively by big holders voting their own self-interest. I thought one of the things that our colleague Andrew Thurman highlighted in the piece that was really great was a tweet from Robert Leshner that harkened back to one of the actual U.S. founding fathers with this great quote, quote, "A democracy will continue to exist up until the time that voters discover that they can vote themselves generous gifts from the public treasury." And he dropped that quote to express why he was voting against the most recent Uniswap governance proposal. So interesting to see these new frontiers of democracy play out online in real time. And I hope that the A16 conversation pushes that in the right direction. I'll toss this down to Ben. I saw your hand up. Really curious for your take on DeFi governance writ large.
Yeah. No, I think this is really interesting. I think that in kind of drawing the parallels between maybe the mainstream and the crypto world, like I think more mainstream VC tech, and obviously like A16Z is a mainstream VC funder, but like this is a process that should go beyond DeFi, right? Like this is really interesting. I really want to see more VCs like, extrapolate and articulate and share kind of how they're thinking about things out in public. Obviously with Uniswap and DeFi, it's incredibly important because like democracy is messy, like, surprise. It's not always clean, but I do think that, being large bag holders in this and being able to vote with those bags like does afford a level of centralization, Naomi, to what you were talking about in terms of decision-making processes. But this is something, and we talk a little bit about how crypto sort of spurred a lot of innovation in the more mainstream financial space, from zero-knowledge proofs and larger integrations around privacy and a number of other things in the adoption. But like, this is something I would like to see more so of in mainstream tech, is just VCs making more transparent decisions, having people weigh in, taking a step back, and not wielding, the stock shares or the clout or the bag holding in quite so coercive way. But Jen, I'll toss it to you. Your hand was up as well.
Yeah, Zack, can you take us back to the basics here? So when a VC invests in a DeFi project, they get tokens from that project, which give them influence over that project, right? And now they're saying they are essentially decentralizing that influence, and they broke it down in a pie chart as to, who is getting some say in what happens with the project. Can you just break this down as to like how that works and what they are predicting for the future?
Yeah, so that's right. So when VCs invest in these projects, be it A16Z, be it Paradigm, be it Multicoin Capital, they're rewarded with a bunch of tokens. That is their skin in the game. And that's how they exert influence over the project going forward, as any other holder in the ecosystem would. So the idea here is, hey, we need to shine a little bit of light on this process. We delegate some of these tokens to different parties, be they university blockchain clubs or giant telecom firms who participate in some of the governance decisions around these proof of stake networks, and also some of these DeFi protocols. So they're saying, hey, Sunshine is the best disinfectant, and that whole Uniswap thing that happened the other week, that was kind of a messy clown show. What we need to do? We need to put a little bit more transparency into what we're doing here, because I think, broadly speaking, DeFi governance to date has left a lot to be wanting, right? The ability for small holders to really cast their votes in a meaningful way hasn't really been proven out just yet. And these big time holders of these governance tokens, more often than not, are the ones who are deciding what happens next on these protocols. So the fact that they're trying to kickstart this conversation and, again, diversify the number of people who are able to exert sway, I think is important. But again, time will tell if it actually works. I'll cast it to you, Naomi, for the last thought, and then we'll move on.
Yeah, I just want to bring up a hugely important counterexample to what A16Z is kind of talking about that happened in the crypto space. So when you do have VCs or central players holding too many tokens, like, you do see pushback from the community. And that's the wonderful nature of these decentralized systems, these open systems, and people can fork projects. Like when Steam was a flourishing platform, their founders had a huge amount of tokens, but there was kind of this agreement with them and the community that they wouldn't use those tokens for staking. And so then Justin Sun bought the project. He inherited all of these tokens, and the community got really worried that he would start to use them and that he wouldn't uphold that unspoken agreement. And so they froze his account, then they forked the project, and now Steam is largely dead, and Hive is this flourishing decentralized network. So, I mean, even when you have these VCs who are investing a bunch of money in these things and maybe getting a lot of power at the end of it through the form of tokens, the community has a huge amount of power. And what we see is the community banding together when it's in their interest to sort of fight back if they feel that those in control are sort of abusing their authority. So it's a wonderful balance of incentives that we've discovered in this decentralized crypto world, which is kind of cool. But let's move on to something where there is no balance at all, where the people in control have no pushback, where there is no accountability, and it's less cool.
What a segue. That was good.
So Australia, I thought I would bring this up because Australia is dead. May they rest in peace. And I thought I would read the obituary today. The dream that was Australia and any semblance of freedom of speech and any semblance of digital privacy is long gone. So the Australian government, they just passed legislation that hands extraordinary new hacking powers to Australian authorities. And what does that mean? It basically means that the Australian Federal Police, the Australian Criminal Intelligence Commission, will now be able to access the computers and networks of those suspected of conducting criminal activity online and take over their online accounts covertly under the Identify and Disrupt bill, which was just passed. And if you dig into how this was passed, I mean, it's so infuriating because you have all these people, suggesting amendments. You have these committees that are suggesting amendments, say, how do we not completely destroy privacy on the internet? And what do? Well, they kind of rejected a bunch of the National Security Committee's suggestions. So the Security Committee called for a higher threshold in issuing the warrants in terms of the crimes they can be applied for. So they said, let's actually just apply these to serious crimes, right? And so they rejected that. They rejected the ability for warrants to only be approved by a judge. They were like, nah, let's just make it really easy for the government to take over these things and not have a judge involved. So it's a really sad situation. As we know, Australia sort of sets the precedent in the Five Eyes. A lot of policies are tested out there that are then, tried out in the US. Australia banned end-to-end encryption. They have fines now for like multi-million-dollar fines for companies that don't add backdoors and don't give the Australian government access when the Australian government demands it. When they released that, then the White House started to really press down on its rhetoric around that as well, introduced a bunch of bills like the Lawful Access to Encrypted Data Act, the Earn It bill, all of that. It's a very scary situation, for digital privacy. It affects the crypto space as well because the government, if they have access to people's back end of any tech that they're using, which is basically what they've demanded and have passed through this, how does that affect your ability to have sovereignty over your money? Like are wallet companies, if they want to exist in Australia, going to have to put in backdoors and all of these things? Like it gets very complicated, but just from a privacy standpoint, it's atrocious. There is no privacy on the internet in Australia, whereas America has this semblance of, we kind of don't spy, and yeah, sure, we get all of the data from the UK and from Australia and New Zealand in this roundabout way. They do all the collection for us, so we have privacy. The Australian government is just outright saying you have no privacy on the internet. We inspect everything. We have the ability to change data on your computer, in your accounts, all of that. So very scary stuff. But Jen, did I see your hand go up there?
Ben had his hand up first, so I'll go after.
I mean, shouts to Australia. It's just like the sandbox of like digital infringement in a lot of different ways. Yeah. We saw them like ban Facebook news, then unban Facebook news, ban and encryption. Like they're just really shooting from the hip. It feels like a little bit over there. I think, my immediate thought on this is like, this kind of prioritizes in a lot of ways the different needs for things like mesh networks, right? For like mixed nets, like other things like that. Because like underlying all of this is ISPs, like internet service providers, like the telecoms industries of the world that are highly centralized. There's only a few of them, at least in the US in particular. I can't speak to Australia, but like provide the digital gateways to even access the internet in and of itself. And those are kind of by and large, the bodies through which, not even individual companies like giving over access accounts, but, in terms of the NSA and others, like really plugging into those entities are the ones that give, the government access to all of these access points. So, I think that getting away from those may be one way to try and fight this. But again, this is really discouraging. I think that, again, we talk about what amounts to criminality and the sliding scope of that. I mean, when you talk about like predictive policing in the US, when you talk about like, recidivism rates and how algorithms are meant to sort of predict those things and influence judicial decisions, this is just like hugely problematic on so a lot of ways and raises more questions than it does answers. But certainly, account takeovers are going to happen, and it's very concerning to see.
Yeah.
Yeah, Naomi, I was just going to add, you didn't mention that the bill was passed in, I think, just about 24 hours amongst all of those rejections happening. And you said that, the amendment to make this for only serious crimes was rejected. But I have a quote here from Home Affairs Minister Karen Andrews. She said, under our changes, the AFP will have more tools to pursue organized crime gangs, keep drugs off our streets and out of our community, and those who commit the most heinous crimes against children. And it's just so frustrating to see government after government use this narrative to implement these laws that put regular law-abiding citizens at risk. It's very, very, very frustrating.
Yeah, it's those charged terms that pull at the heartstrings. I mean, there's another quote here that says, it's obviously much easier to justify the introduction of such powers by focusing on the most serious types of crimes. No one would argue with that in respect to crimes like child abuse and exploitation and terrorism. But it's important that we engage in a more difficult task of justifying the introduction of extraordinary powers by reference to how the powers could actually be used. And that's the rhetoric that's always missing when we have these vast-reaching surveillance laws that are introduced. They don't talk about the implications of how they'll actually be used. They just say, well, we could use this to fight this very, very dangerous thing. And it's not talking about, well, this is going to infringe on the privacy rights of everyone. This is probably going to be exploited and taken advantage of and used for other nefarious things. So, before I go into another rant that's anti-government surveillance, I'm going to throw this to who is next, actually? Ben, I'm introducing you. We're talking about Microsoft.
Yeah, speaking of gatekeepers with past monopolistic tendencies, no. But Microsoft has been awarded a U.S. patent for software that it says can help users develop blockchain applications by making it easier and more efficient to create crypto tokens for different distributed ledgers. So we were joking pre-show, and I really think of this like, Squarespace is equivalent for just spinning up a website template. It seems that Microsoft is trying to do the same thing with crypto tokens. And it's pretty interesting. We see tech companies often like file patent applications in advance of even, the most futuristic ideas they may have, such that they can get awarded it and then have, kind of the sole rights to it. But this one is actually awarded. This is a patent application that has been approved. So, Naomi, I kind of want to get your thoughts on this one. I think it's really interesting, but I am still like, is it good? Is it bad? Like, I'm super curious and don't have clear ideas. So, Naomi, what are yours?
Oh, gosh. All right. Well, let's dig into the world of patents and innovation and all that, because it's a meaty topic. I mean, I would say in the large part, the innovation that we've seen in the crypto space is because people have this technology that they're free to iterate on and free to build on. And so that's why we've seen such a flourishing and such high speed pace. The more patents we bring into this mix where people are safeguarding their ideas, a lot of them are patent trolls. Let's be honest, there's just a huge patent troll industry, especially in the US, where people will create these patents that are pretty vague, and then they'll go after anyone that has any semblance of similarity to what they have been awarded a patent for. So I do worry about patents in this industry, because I love that it's this open system where anyone can innovate and create new things and build on the ideas of others. I think that's how we push society forward. So this does worry me. I wonder how, is this going to be like one of those patents where they're like, oh no, this is just was the defensive patent, so that we're covering that so that no one can go after us because we own the patent? Or is this going to be an offensive patent where they use it to bring down competitors, which I'm not a fan of? But Zack, I'll throw to you for your thoughts.
Or is it going to be patently offensive? I like patently. It's good puns. Thank you.
Okay.
Very
good. I enjoyed that one.
We're going to get through the whole show with no puns.
Hey, man.
No,
happy to help.
It's called the hash, or rehash it out. Come on.
It's okay. Yeah, no, I was talking to somebody about this the other day. I was like, remember when like patent news used to be a staple of the crypto press? You'd scan the patent filing office. You say, Microsoft, Amazon, this big company applied for a patent. Or, hey, this big company got a patent, even better. It's one of those like tea leaf stories from sort of the blockchain, not Bitcoin era that feels a little bit quaint now. I think there's so much going on in this market that some of these patents, whether they be defensive or offensive, are a little bit less notable, because I think a lot of this stuff, you don't really see it come to pass. Like, I would like to go back into CoinDesk archive and like see what patents have actually yielded like an actual thing from some of these tech giants. And I would bet that it would be like probably pretty low hit rate on that one. So that to me, sort of in the meta context, feels like what jumps out here when I hear about Microsoft crypto patent. I'd be really curious to see if anything ultimately reaches the market. But Jen, curious for your thoughts.
Patent aside, what does everyone think of the idea
of creating
I
tokens?
think we don't need more tokens. But that's just me. Like,
I'm
there's
just
already
streamlining the token process.
Too many tokens. TMT.
There's never enough. You can always have more tokens. You can always have more ERC 721s, ERC 20s. You could do all sorts of crazy tokens.
Zach, is this your social token, Ben, where you're just like, I just want a Zach token? Like, that's really the whole deal.
We'll
that's
get
the
there.
end game.
That's the end game.
No,
it's like, it's not so good with the Z, because you're like cash, the symbol, like Zack, or I could just be Sack. I could be Sack token.
Oh my gosh.
There's no way that could go wrong at all. No, but I think this does stand in interesting opposition. Like, one, again, I mean, you got back and forth. Zach, you were talking about the tea leaves aspect here, but like, there is the Crypto Open Patent Alliance that's headed by Square, right? Like, that is a whole motivating kind of idea here as a nonprofit where it's like we should not be filing patents on certain things in this regard. And I think that there could be a coming clash in a lot of ways between if we're talking about Square and Copa and decentralization versus like the Microsofts of the world with Microsoft 365 and everything else, but also like filing patent applications being awarded them for like spinning up tokens. Like we talked about how A16Z is trying to be like transparent with some of their governance process around DeFi, right? Like there is going to be a collision at some point between patents hitting the world of decentralization in a really interesting way. And Zack, what are your thoughts on that?
I mean, if we want to game it out and just like theorize, right? Microsoft owns Xbox. Like gaming has been a pretty prominent venue for like social tokens. We see entire social token startups like Rally sort of really focusing in on this area of like gamers, like creating a community and having a token that like exists in that community. So, hey, maybe Microsoft is like, hey, let's do it for Xbox and we'll create like this token ecosystem among our gaming contingent. But, that's the thing with patents. Like you see them. Typically, the company doesn't necessarily comment, and it's a little bit like, oh, I wonder what's going to happen. Anyway.
The gamer gatekeepers. All right. I like it. But right. Jen, what have you got for us today?
All right. Okay. So remember Blau. Blau sold an NFT of his album back in February for $11.7 million. And now he's raised $16 million to launch a music investment platform that tokenizes music royalties. So stay with me here. The platform is going to be called Royal. And it's going to allow fans to buy ownership in songs and earn royalties from them. He explained that they're calling the tokens limited digital assets. So here's how it works. An artist would decide how many of their royalties they want to share. Then they would put those up for sale on Royal. And then fans would buy those royalties, hold on to them, make a profit off of them in the future, or sell them to other fans or back to the artist. So a lot going on here. Ben, I'm going to kick this to you. No. Do you think, what do you think of this? Because I immediately think of how the crypto industry has been working to disrupt the traditional record label model. It's not only the crypto industry that's disrupted that. We've seen streaming services kind of slide in there. What do you think of this? Do you think that it has a place in our future, or do you think it's a great idea that we'll see fizzle out?
I think I'm tired. This one got extremely meta for me, Jen. Before the show, I was like, hey, can you tell me more about what the heck is going on here? It feels a little bit, maybe I'm not thinking of this, but stocks are like DeFi for music royalties, which again, is interesting in theory, but I'm also LDAs, limited digital assets, NFTs, what does this mean? And again, and when I talk about too many tokens, I'm like, do we need this? I think it's, again, an interesting idea, but I think that I'm tired. Naomi, what have you got on this one? Because I'm just not sure, again, like Microsoft, exactly what to think about it.
I love it. I love that Blau is doing this. So
Hard
Royal has said that they have no plans in issuing securities. That was my biggest concern, because I was like, this clearly seems like you're buying, a percentage of someone's brand or someone's business if they're in the music industry. But he said that Royal has worked with former regulators to ensure that its LDAs will follow geographic rules. And so you can bet that it probably won't be available in the US, because nothing's available in the US because they ban everything. But they also say that artists can't use Royal to fundraise for unreleased songs, he said. Letting them do so could change the categorization of the asset, which is interesting. But one thing I didn't realize that was specific to the music industry is that owning master recording rights and music today is not treated as a security. So, tokenizing that, dividing that up and selling that to people in this decentralized model, it seems that they're not actually carving up securities and selling them. So that's interesting. So he added, putting that on the blockchain, people will have opinions about that, but people can buy, trade, and sell royalty rights today as non-securities in the real world. So that's what makes this super interesting to me and makes me think that it has legs. And, as we already mentioned, there's so much need for this. The record label model at the moment is fizzling out. You've seen, as Jen, you mentioned, we've seen so many people coming in and trying to disrupt that. You have the Napster era, then you have the iTunes era, then you got the Spotify era, and all of these have really started to put pressure on this, centralized record label model where they really just control the artist artist completely. You know, obviously the artist gets perks from that. The record label in return is going to advertise for them, is going to do a tremendous amount of PR work, is going to promote them and build a career for them. But at the same time, it can be quite predatory. If you're dealing with people like there's a kind of unbalance of power. I'm always hesitant to go that route in rhetoric, because it's like at the end of the day, you're making a voluntary agreement. So, you know, if you're at an imbalance of power and you're looking to benefit from these record labels, you know, cool, make that choice. That's up to you. But this is something that completely changes the paradigm and says, you know, perhaps you don't need to make those sort of sacrifices. Perhaps there's a way where you can live your life and maybe you won't see as much of the potential upside as like a centralized record label that has tremendous sway and tremendous power could do for you. But you may have more control over your music. You know, you could potentially buy back your rights. You know, Taylor Swift famously, because I got to bring her into the conversation, tried to buy back her masters. This was going to happen. And she couldn't do it. You know, either she didn't have the capital or it wasn't offered to her, you know, before the sale of the recent sale. But this could be a scenario where artists could have more control over that and make it easier for them to, you know, buy back their masters at the end of the day. But Zach, sorry, I'll throw to you for your thoughts there.
No, those are all good thoughts. I mean, I think with a little luck, they may have sort of threaded the needle to avoid like securities regulation. So they've like threaded the needle and like situated it like very precisely within existing songs, right? So that you can be like, oh, okay, like I'm going to invest in some artists that I care about because I think their fortunes are rising, and therefore whatever like share of that little sliver of royalty I'm entitled to will grow in value as the number of plays grow in value with that person's music. So like it's interesting to think about how you could use this to really vote with your feet and support the artists that you like. And also notably, I think like the fact that Fred Ursum and at Paradigm, Coinbase co-founder, very successful venture capitalist at this point in time, he's joining the board of this thing after, you know, ponying up $7 million to invest in it. I think it's his only non-Coinbase board seat. So an interesting team behind this one for sure. So we're going to see what comes of the royal markets. All right, that's it for the hash, though. We got to wrap this thing up. We don't have any royalties, I don't think. Has anyone gotten a royalty check from just being so good at the hash? Anybody?
Not yet.
Women journalism.
I'm waiting for my royalty check.
The best we get is a backlink.
All this exposure. It's just, we need some royalties. Anyway, well, we'll do it again tomorrow. I think tomorrow's Friday. I'm not sure. But I think it might be. And we'll be back for a fun Friday show. And we'll talk to you about all that we can think of in crypto and then some. I'm Zack. That's Jen down there. We got Ben next to her above. That's Naomi. We miss Will Foxley today, but hopefully we'll see him again soon. And until next time, bye-bye from the hash. Have a good one.
Bye.